Welcome to the Back in Business podcast. I'm business writer, broadcaster, podcaster, and grumpy old so-and-so, Mickey Clark.
I'm glad you said so-and-so and not what we normally call it. I'm a small business journalist, Liz Barkley, and I'm not nearly as grumpy as he is. I think we're both a bit grumpy today, aren't we? Not though, because the weather is dreadful, at least where I am in London, presumably where you are too.
It's tipping it down. Dogs haven't been out yet.
No, my dog has refused to go out the back door since he woke up at 7 this morning. I'm a bit worried about the consequences of that. But it just seems to me that it's been a bit of a quieter week on the whole business front, but we've been concentrating more on the public health issues. It's just feeling...
I think there is that case, but also there's a lot more fallout from the COVID-19 and the impact of the restrictions, not the disease itself, the virus itself, but the restrictions which are impacting on business. And I've seen it more and more anecdotally. We went down to Whitstable near me earlier this week, a pub on the beach, lovely spot. And I got in there early. We grabbed a table. There was 4 of us. And during the space of 10 minutes, 3 large groups were turned away because the pub was full up. Now, the pub wasn't full up because of COVID-19 it is. There is no pub in this country that could withstand that sort of treatment of its customers over a long period of time. And it's as we were saying last week, if you cut off the income coming through the front door, the costs are still going to go up. You're going to have no profit margin left. And I think if this carries on the way it is, especially with this curfew of 10 o'clock, I think there's a lot of pubs going to be going to the wall very, very quickly. And the same applies to restaurants.
It's just so sad, apart from everything else, because so many people...
Well, it is, because it's a change in your social life as well. I mean, I'm going up to Norfolk next week, and normally a few pubs would be encountered. But you're thinking now, am I really going to go and book a table to sit in a pub and have a casual pint?
It wasn't you. It wasn't you I was thinking about. It was the pub owners.
Oh, was it? I was thinking about me as usual.
The restaurateurs, absolutely. And of course, the first words, folks, out of his mouth are always about pubs. And did you notice he said, and I got in there early?
It was that was shopping.
Why am I not surprised by any of that? But the other thing that the news yesterday, local news, certainly in London, was full of was events companies really, really up against it, because London, other big cities, they are dependent on business events, for instance, to bring people in to do to fill up the hotels, to fill up the restaurants, to fill up the pubs, etc. And it's just not happening. So it's
not just London. I mean, you've got the major exhibition centre in Manchester. All the big city centres have got them now, and they just ain't happening.
Leeds. Yeah.
You know, you can open these places up and you can have a dozen people wandering around in this vast auditorium, but then you've got to have the staff there and the costs are still there. So it doesn't become profitable for the businesses. And that's part of the problem. It's not the virus, it's the regulations being imposed by the government that are crippling all the businesses.
My concern is that, you know, the journalists keep saying, what is the scientific basis on which this restriction has been added to the list? And we keep hearing, well, we're not sure there is one. It's being worked out.
I'm an expert. I know. Listen to me. I mean, that's what it's boiling down to now. And certainly with the 10 o'clock deadline for many pubs, I can understand why they've done it, but it's the sort of thing they would have done in 1914 at the outbreak of the First World War, and did do. They curbed licensing hours so that people stayed sober. It was pointless, because if they can't drink in the pub, they'll find somewhere else to drink if they want to, if they're in need of a drink. So I think, you know, what we're seeing now is a thing that's not been thought through. Plus the fact so many of our MPs have got no business experience. They don't know how to run a business. That is part of the problem.
We've even had an MP say that on one of our podcasts. Mickey, we're not experts.
No, well, we are. We're experts on everything and nothing, yeah.
sadly. But maybe Breon Finch, our head of public affairs, might be able to give us a bit more of an expert view on what's been going on this week. Breon.
Well, yeah, no, thank you for having me. I mean, it's been a fiery week, really, in Westminster at the moment over certain divisions on the restrictions between the backbenchers and the government, and there's been a real divide that's kind of grown up. And in fact, actually, just building on what you've been saying about conferences in the cities and the regions, of course, you know, the conferences this week and the weeks prior now being digital and online. These cities like Manchester, where the Midland Hotel, which will have the Tory Party, traditionally have the Tory Party conference, this year has been completely missed out. They've missed out on the economic money that will coming into the city. There's also what you're saying about pubs. There's another division. We saw a division at the beginning of the week, interestingly, over scrutiny in the restrictions coming forwards from the government, but then there's a new rebellion happening over the 10 p.m. pub curfew. So that might be something you can join in with there, Mickey.
Well, yeah, possibly. I mean, whenever you covered an exhibition story for the BBC or any of the newspapers that me and Liz used to write for, you'd always say, you know, chew the cud, press the flesh. They were the things. Can't do that on Zoom, can you? Really? You know, it's about meeting people, getting to know people, whether you can trust them or not, sizing them up. And on Zoom, that actually is quite a difficult aspect. I wonder, yes, it may be a good thing, but I think it's limited. Yeah.
Is that the digital conferences?
Yeah, you know, you want to deal with somebody, you want to deal with them face to face. In the end, otherwise it's one computer talking to another.
Yes, absolutely. Well, there's a whole industry that's wrapped around it, from hospitality and leisure to the pubs where people go after hours drinking, and some of the meeting kind of spaces as well. There's the city, as you know, for those of you who have attended conferences, they're a sort of fantastic space for ideas and meetings and socializing, but also to kind of really, as you say, press the fresh on a few things. So there's been this is all being framed this week, these divisions really, in the lead up to the Conservative conference. It's been very kind of untraditional in how it's gone around, in the fact that normally we would be having all the party lines being trotted out, and this week, of course, we haven't. We've had divisions, we've had arguments, very, very public arguments, and some of this has been kind of lost really on business and some of the kind of issues that businesses are going to be facing over the next month. MPs have been very aware of, but there hasn't necessarily been the space, I think, in the political debate and the drama that's been going on to kind of get these through. So, for example, we've got furlough ending at the end of this month. A lot of businesses are beginning to make redundancies. They're starting now. And what the effect of that is going to be is usually something that will probably be debated right now, but it hasn't kind of got through because of the effect of the drama.
I've seen one report today, Breon, which says 4 million unemployed.
Yes.
You know, and that whole thing with the Chancellor last week about viable jobs and not being able to support, you know, certain industries, it had a scary feel to me, as though this is, you know, we're putting this proposal forward to support, to subsidise, whatever you want to call it, but you know, it ain't really going to work, and there are going to be casualties, and you're going to have to put up with it.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are going to be some casualties. I think it doesn't matter what he was going to do. However, in this particular proposal that he's put forward, there's no definition around viable job. What is a viable job? You know, and actually, if so you could argue that many would continue to be viable jobs if the government continued the furlough scheme in particular sectors. So, what is a viable job is entirely being left up to interpretation. There's also another question over: does the new job support scheme go far enough? Like, does it actually is it enough to support jobs? And then the third question, which I thought is quite interesting because it kind of depends very much on the sector and also the industry and the company itself. But will the new scheme potentially encourage some redundancies? Because the amount of hours. So some people may, you know, get rid of, say, 2 staff if they can consolidate those hours into one worker.
It seemed to me, Breon, it didn't take the small businesses very long to work out it was going to be a lot cheaper just to let 2 people go, rather than
have one work full
3
time.
people working, exactly. And so that's not necessarily likely to work terribly well. But another thing, Breon, that I've noticed this morning that doesn't seem to have worked terribly well for the hospitality sector is the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. The British Chambers
Yes.
of saying that didn't help anybody.
I think that was fairly obvious.
Yes.
Maybe to us.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, we've had businesses coming onto the podcast saying that it's useful for a period of the week, but then it actually kind of skews the effect at the weekends when they would have most of their trade. There's some interesting statistics on a survey that was done by the British Chamber of Commerce that effectively show that their members say that the Eat Out to Help Out scheme was not helpful. And I think that if we watch this carefully, this was a flagship thing that Rishi Sunak was trumpeting, of course, amongst the Tory party.
Before it was even launched.
Yes, exactly. And well, let's see how this goes down during the conference. I think it's going to be quite interesting.
Okay, Breon, there's somebody who has been nodding and shaking her head as you've been talking. So let's bring in Stephanie Jepson, who is the owner of Courtney World Travel, based in Tewkesbury in Gloucestershire. Stephanie, we were talking about the job support scheme, and you were nodding vigorously and shaking your head, and all in agreement with Breon. Have you been in the situation where you've had to make people furloughed, had to lose members of staff?
Yes, I have. When the job scheme came out, we put 2 girls on furlough. Then what we wanted to do was perhaps put other people on furlough, but the cut-off date was the 10th of June. So we couldn't put other people on there. It would have made so much sense just to have kept it going until October so that you could semi-furlough, bring people back and carry on like that to share it, if you like, and would have really helped the travel industry because we're now going into our quiet time. We couldn't furlough everybody at the beginning because, as you can imagine, everything was such a mess with everything was cancelled. We had to cancel bookings, rebook people. Luckily, we did manage to book a lot of our customers, but we had one hell of a lot of cancellations. The tour operators, a lot of them furloughed all their staff and left just a real skeleton. So it was taking 2 to 3 hours to get through to tour operators to try and get these bookings postponed or cancelled, and to get people's monies back. So we were just constantly on the phone. There was no way we could furlough any more of our staff. But now we're going into a quiet time for travel, and we could do, I'll be quite honest with you, with being able to use a proper furlough scheme now. A lot of companies took advantage of the furlough scheme quite unfairly, I think. So obviously it has been abused, whereas the travel industry, we could really do with that now. We're going to our quiet time. We haven't earned any money since last year. Our long haul market, which is from November through to March, that pretty much cancelled in January when the first hint of this virus was hitting the Far East. So everybody cancelled their bookings, and then obviously it's carried on. March is the traditional time when you're collecting balances for the summer. Of course, all the bookings cancelled for the summer. We've had no summer season. So the travel industry has really not earned any money for probably more than 12 months, really. And we only earn our commission when there's bums on seats, when they're actually flying.
What about Christmas then? Is that not a big earner for you?
Ski time.
It's ski time. People are going on long haul holidays, but that market is not as big as the main summer sun. But the majority of our business is, yes, you've got your winter period, but the big bookings are from March through to September. That's your big booking period. That's when people are traveling.
Now,
When he launched the furlough scheme, I understood what it meant. It did what it said on the packet. It furloughed businesses, employees, and for an indefinite period of time, or 6 months, 4 months, whatever.
Yeah.
This new scheme, I'm not quite sure what it's supposed to be, because I would have thought if he'd have cut back on the furlough and instead focused on certain industries, certain sectors that needed the support, then it would be a much better way of spending money. But as it is, any company can go now and apply for this scheme if they've got the nous, if they know what they're doing. But I don't see it saving businesses. I think it's just going to speed up the process of redundancies.
Yeah, I've spoken to a lot of travel agent owners, and a lot of them are going to be making more redundancies now because this scheme isn't really going to help us at all.
Well, how are you adapting? What are you doing? What are you thinking? What's your forward planning? Because obviously, if you're still going at this point in time, then you are hoping to weather the next 6 months and rebuild. So what's your thinking?
We're going to carry on as we are. We're on the high street, and I think it's important for us to be open, and people see us, and it'll install confidence into people. Excuse me. But I know a lot of agents who are furloughing their businesses. Literally, I say furloughing, hibernating their businesses. They're going to work from home. They're basically laying off all their staff. A lot of them are doing unpaid leave, and then come back in January. But
are you running up an overdraft, Stephanie, if you're continuing to run? Because the money will have to come from somewhere, and if you haven't got income coming through, then it's a problem.
Yeah, luckily I haven't got an overdraft yet, and we own the building. So we're not paying rent. There's a lot of agents out there who are paying rent. We're not. We are in a lucky position. I will be honest with you. I would dearly like to be able to furlough my staff to save myself money. I may end up in an overdraft. We've done the bounce back loan, as everybody has. So yeah, just got to keep trying.
I think what's interesting, though, one of the things that is particularly pertinent that you mentioned to your industry is that you are susceptible to seasons and seasonal change and how the market shifts with that. And so, but coming from and I can see some of the government's issue is how do you create policy that reflects that for even, and particularly when it comes to the furlough, the furlough is a policy, one size fits all. For all industries and all sectors. However, that being said, what they can do is understand what you can do in policy is create flexibility through then paring down based on need. And so that's where the Chancellor really kind of needs to, in many people's opinions and mine as well, that it really needs to focus on what are those needs and understanding what those seasonal or fluctual changes are in markets.
Yeah, definitely. I think that possibly people that haven't been furloughed should now be able to come onto a furlough scheme. So obviously the ones that have been furloughed, they can come back, and then you can put other people on it. That to me makes more sense.
Okay, let me bring in Mike and Philip, our other two guests. Mike Brewer is the chief economist at the Resolution Foundation, and Philip Salter set up the Entrepreneurs Network. In 2014, Philip, I think in order to try to make Britain one of the best places in the world to start up a small business in particular, given what we've just heard there, and given actually what Breon has just said about government, if you are going to impose restrictions on a sector, shouldn't you make some financial provision for that sector to survive? I think, Breon, was what you were saying. Mike, where are we? Give us an overview. Has that happened at all, or has the one-size-fits-all approach been a bit of a disaster for some sectors in particular?
Yeah, it's really, and we're really quite amazed actually at Resolution Foundation. The government seems very insistent not on taking a sector by sector approach. And it may be back in March that was the right thing to do. I mean, I guess if we can remember back then, we probably thought it was going to be a short, sharp shock, and the government was doing policy making incredibly quickly. So I think I'm not going to criticize it for the schemes it designed then. But now where we are, no, it's very, very clear that the impact on the economy from coronavirus is highly specific to certain sectors. And that's just not being recognized in anything the government's doing in its support to business, nor the way it's trying to protect jobs.
Hospitality, aviation, theatres, cinemas, they're all being shut down because of the restrictions rather than the problems relating to the actual virus itself. And Rishi Sunak gave the impression he hadn't even thought about any of this until just a week or 10 days ago. It does seem as though he's making it up on the back of a fag packet, doesn't it?
Do you think that's totally fair, Mike?
I think it's...
So from
as ever, I might not
have... I suppose, I think I completely agree. I think the sectors that are being regulated to try and stop the spread of the virus should be compensated accordingly. So in that respect, one thing I would say, where I guess I differ slightly from some of the earlier comments, is I do think it's hard to choose between the kind of health of the nation and the stopping the spread of the virus and their business interests. I think they're kind of aligned. So even in countries where they've been less onerous in terms of regulation, people have chosen to kind of step back from the economy and have kind of self-regulated in some senses. So I think in that respect, it doesn't really matter whether it's imposed by the government or whether it's done by individuals. We're facing a pandemic and we need to ensure that the businesses that would otherwise be viable after the pandemic is over, after we've got a vaccine, which is one of the optimistic aspects of this. I think there's a lot of optimistic kind of news around that potential early next year. Then I think the government needs to be there. But I wouldn't say that. I don't think all of the policies have been good policies. I think some of them have been bad policies, but the policies themselves are kind of understandable, given that if we lose control of the virus, we also lose control of the economy at the same time. So I don't think those things are as kind of in kind of contrast with each other as maybe some commentators think.
I mean, Mike, if you're going to shut down certain sectors such as aviation, aeronautics, leisure, theatres, then you're going to have to compensate it, because countries that do not regulate to the extent we've done would be in a position to make great gains when this thing settles. The virus is cured or goes away or whatever it does. By not supporting them, we do seem to be putting these businesses in a very dicey situation, and the economy.
Yeah, I mean, this is the really, really tough call that the government's got to make. And I say before, I think the situation in March was almost easier for it. We thought it was going to be a short, sharp shock.
Blanket shutdown.
So, well, no, also just throw money everywhere. All right. I mean, they just poured out money across the job retention scheme.
No object.
Exactly. Money was no object. Now it is clear. Now we think the virus is going to be with us for a longer time, and some of those sectors you just mentioned, Mickey, are not going to be able to operate for a long time.
No.
So now it's a much, much more difficult or more expensive problem the government's got. And it's really, I imagine they have been thinking, well, the choices are, do we try and preserve the hospitality sector the way it was in March until a vaccine is found? Or do we recognize that we're just going to have to, the sector will have to lose people. They're going to have to move into other sectors that are expanding. And it's obviously decided that preserving everything the way it was is too expensive. And I think it's probably right to do that. Now we're thinking that, now we're more aware of what the timeline's going to be. Now we're thinking in years, not months. I think it would be unrealistic. And it would also be very damaging for individuals themselves to be furloughed and not working for long periods of time. So if the restrictions on activity that we need to follow because of the virus mean that we just can't go to nightclubs anymore, we can't have live music, right? Then it's probably best to allow the people who work in these industries to get them to do something else, rather than otherwise they basically make unemployed.
Well, where were the proposals from the Chancellor for that?
Yeah, right.
There was
exactly.
no training proposals whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if he'd have targeted the furlough scheme by extending it to industries that do need the support, that would have been less costly than giving it to companies who don't need it. which is what he's done.
I think
can I take a step backwards here, Mike? Just give us a bit of an overview then, because you're saying it's not fair to keep people furloughed in sectors which aren't going to come back, and I absolutely get that, and they need to move into other sectors that are expanding. But what are those sectors that are expanding? And actually, you can't turn a chef into a bricklayer or a chef into an AI specialist or whatever it happens to be in the matter of a fortnight. So, what do we need to do to achieve that shift?
No, you can't. And I think, right, and I'm definitely not supporting everything the government is doing right now. And I think, Mickey, you were getting at that. So the government is probably right that we can't furlough people for years and years and years, or for a couple of years. But what it hasn't done is done anything to stimulate the economy or to boost those kind of sectors which could absorb workers. I mean, let's face it, we are going to have an unemployment crisis. It might not be 4 million, but it's going to be 2 or 3 million. And that's a huge recession, right? And normally in a recession, you expect the government to do some priming, to do some pump priming, to boost those areas of the economy which can soak up workers. So yes, it's doing a lot to try and prevent businesses from going bust and prevent workers losing their jobs, but you've got to do the other thing as well, which is put in more support to those sectors that can work safely and can absorb workers. Now we gave 2, for examples, a few months ago. We suggested that I guess the government's doing that with its new green grants, but we suggested a much bigger scheme to try and soak up some labour into retrofitting our homes with more insulation. We've also suggested that the government give money not to business but to local authorities to increase social care. Now we picked those 2 examples because we thought those were socially useful jobs that we probably would want more people anyway. But of course, it could look at the private sector as well. And basically, it needs to be doing something to generate the activity so that firms feel able to create vacancies to help soak up the pool of unemployed. That's what we're missing. And can I say one more thing I think we're missing? I was really struck by some of Stephanie's, by one of Stephanie's points. So I think it's right that we don't furlough people for years and years and years, but it is, I think as we see the restrictions start to increase again, I think we need a new scheme for those businesses which were operating perfectly fine in July and August, but might now have to shut down again as we go through the autumn and the winter. The people for whom the no households mixing means that people stop going to restaurants. So we may see pressure for a new furlough scheme if the virus and the restrictions get tougher.
And I think that's why everybody's getting so depressed by the
right. And
sorry, Stephanie.
I think a flexible furlough as well, because it doesn't need to be that person's got to be off work for months. I mean, we're all hoping that come March that travel can pick up with the use of testing at the airports. They can test. When I flew to Rhodes last week, they were testing at the airport, and they had it sussed completely, and it felt safer over there than it did over here, and I can say that hand on heart. So once the testing comes into airports, people can start travelling. Obviously there's going to be restrictions, but people can start travelling again. Once people start travelling, then engineering will pick up. I mean, Tewkesbury is huge for aerospace engineering. So we've got companies here that make undercarriages for aircraft. They make the tow trucks that tow your aircraft in. There's such a big industry that travel props up. We are a viable industry, and we create in ourselves a lot of jobs dependent on people flying. So even just like retail, so clothes shops, people aren't buying clothes because they're not going on holiday. It's simple things like that, that you see all the swimming costumes on sale now in the shops, or the aisles of sun cream that haven't been sold. People aren't buying perfume. It's a
ripple effect.
It's a ripple effect. And travel, I really don't think that this government understand just how important travel and the travel industry is, and it is a viable industry.
Philip, I'm just conscious that you're trying desperately to get in there.
Sorry.
What
are your entrepreneurs in the network telling you? Who's the winners and losers there? Who's struggling? Who's actually seeing opportunity here?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much kind of based on sector. So we have entrepreneurs across all kind of sectors of the economy. So most obviously kind of hospitality entrepreneurs, which is quite a big thing obviously in the UK, and very successful kind of export as well in terms of food and drink, obviously struggling significantly. Within tech, there's obviously some winners. So, I mean, we've just got to think about how we're talking now on Zoom. There's obviously like areas of the economy which are benefiting, and you can see that in data that, for example, Bohurst have put out on kind of fundraisers that, you know, at the kind of upper end of the market. So people, there are instances where people are benefiting. And then when you look at kind of smaller businesses, some have been lucky enough to be in a sector where they've been able to pivot to provide what they're doing online, or to kind of compete potentially with larger businesses by doing something in an innovative way, whereas the larger business isn't able to kind of do that as quickly because of all the things incumbent on them. But I think it would be kind of overblowing things to say that this is a great time to be in business. It's obviously a challenge, and just surviving is I think, you know, a mark of being successful at this time. And anyone that kind of comes through this the other side can kind of feel proud of what they've done in that process. So I do think it's very difficult. But there are definitely kind of changes that are happening in the economy. So we've got a report out today on working from home, and it looks at the kind of economic case for it. It looks at what the trend has been prior to this. Looks at employers and productivity data of randomized controlled trials, and actually shows that it goes against my intuition because I hate working from home and I love being in the office. But apparently, according to the research, which I've got to follow, it is working well for a lot of businesses. They're finding that it's working well, and they're as productive, and there's evidence of people being productive. So I think there are going to be some fundamental changes that happen in the economy. Although I hope it's not to the point where we're stuck at home all the time, which I don't expect it will be.
What's the experience of your members with regards to government support and banking support? Because there does seem to be this feeling with the Treasury that they don't really like small companies. They all think they're tax dodgers and need to pay more tax.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, anyone that was paying themselves with dividends were completely left in the lurch, basically. And it was a lot of that was to do with the government not having data, so they couldn't differentiate between if you were paying yourself in dividends or if you were getting kind of interest on investments. And so I think there's a real failure, not necessarily from this government, but multiple governments, of not having the right data to be able to target support at the people that really needed it. Self-employed have also kind of struggled a bit, and will be struggling more, I suppose, as that kind of winds down as well. So I think things, so we're involved in, on the upper end of the market, kind of the future funds stuff, which is good for high growth businesses, but even that is just a small number of businesses. It's not going to help that many. I think the loans have been relatively successful. I think the furlough scheme as originally designed was welcomed, but then exactly what Stephanie was saying about flexibility, the lack of flexibility. And then also now, I suppose there isn't really the plan in place to support smaller businesses. And one thing I'd definitely like to put out is the Kickstarter scheme. So the businesses that will create most of the jobs, in normal times, out of recessions, the businesses that create the jobs are young companies, not say small companies, but younger companies, because they're, for the obvious reasons that they're growing and they've got ambitions and for all those particular reasons. So the Kickstarter scheme, you've got to have a minimum of 30 employees to bring on, and that's a very generous scheme. And that's a bit mad. There are intermediaries people can go through, but apparently, from what I'm hearing, the incentives aren't really there financially to do that for these intermediaries. So that's an area where it's a bit of a own goal for the government not to let smaller companies bring on these kind of young people and effectively have it subsidised by the government. So I think there are areas like tweaks to policy that need to be made. And
Mike, Philip, do you think that was deliberate, or was that a law of unintended consequences? Not really thinking it through, that actually it's the small businesses, it's the new businesses that create the jobs. Therefore, let's make sure they're the ones that can bring on the young people into those roles, rather than the bigger businesses that can take on 30 or get together with somebody else and take on 30. Was that an intended consequence?
I don't think it was intended. again, we could blame policy making at speed. I mean, the government's also is worried a little bit about fraud and misuse of money. And this, and as Philip said, the Kickstarter scheme is also very generous. The government's sort of taking up the majority of the cost of employing somebody, and it's a little bit scarred now by misuse and fraud in the JRS. So it could be that it's just targeting it at firms that it thinks will have better ways of, more reliable ways of accounting for the money. But no, it doesn't seem ideal, does it? I think in the previous time this was tried, well, basically after the last recession, the Great Recession, the scheme was aimed more at public sector and charities as much as the private sector.
And unfortunately, though, we've not got a great record of making those kind of schemes work particularly well, partly because they last for about 6 months, then people are back onto the unemployment list again, and perhaps any training that is provided is not really geared up for the jobs that are becoming available. How do we guard against that again?
Yeah, I mean, this the Kickstarter scheme is aimed at young people, and we definitely know that the most damaging thing for a young person is to be shut out of the labour market entirely. And so, it's a really good idea the government's doing this. It's not the solution to soaking up the massive unemployed people I was talking about earlier. We need something on a bigger scale than that. So this is really, you should think of the Kickstarter really as being aimed at preventing absolutely terrible outcomes for young people. It's not bad. The previous scheme, the Future Jobs Fund, I think it was called a decade ago. I mean, that was evaluated, and it does pretty well actually compared to other labour market programs we can think of for young people. But this is a different kind of recession, isn't it? And we just don't know how long it's going to last, because effectively we're being driven by the public health, by the virus, by the search for the vaccine. So it may well be that the 6-month placement, they come off that and we're still having the same kind of conversations, because we're still in this world. But that's a new uncertainty, and of course, I mean, that's true for every economic decision the government's trying to make at the moment. That there's an underpinning public health uncertainty.
I would argue though. Sorry, just jumping in here. I mean, when it comes to the skills initiatives and interventions that the government is currently making, I think that there is huge room for whatever investment the government is going to put in. It will pay back massively. And it could be a crucial part of their levelling up agenda. So, for every pound that they put in right now into the Kickstarter scheme, and they have the infrastructure that matches the skills needs of local areas, say, like we were just talking about the aerospace in Tewkesbury, for example, and in manufacturing, and to support that kind of area, apprenticeships in that area, it will be hugely beneficial for the next 10, 15, even 25 years, when people are in these jobs and building their careers and building businesses, for the next generation.
But what you're saying is, if we get it right.
If we get it right, but then again, the investment has to be in the infrastructure to deliver skills training, which we haven't done for like the last 20 years, 25 years, I would argue.
Try 40 and 45 years. You might be close. Yeah, I mean, we are atrocious in this country about investment in skills.
Yeah. But we have a real opportunity to turn that around right now, and that could all be part of the government's levelling up agenda.
Okay. What do we need to see? This is the weekend of the virtual Tory party conference. The Lib Dems have had theirs. The Labour Party has had theirs. The SNP is having theirs next week. But this is the Tory party one. This weekend, this podcast will be going out on Monday, so it will have been, the discussions will have been had.
Ancient history.
What are those discussions that we need them to be having this weekend, thinking about what needs to be put in place for the next 6 months? Come on, who's got to... Nobody's jumping in now. Everybody's going, I've no idea. Mike.
Just targeted furlough. Targeted furlough.
Yeah, I'll go along with that.
I definitely agree with that. Targeted, more flexible targeting, and furlough being able to be used at different points over the next next few months, really.
Mike?
I mean, I think what's missing, and indeed, as we've already said, is a sense of what the strategy is to get us through the next 6 months or 12 months. So the last week's announcement, the Winter Economic Plan, it was built up to be quite a big deal, but it was really just one tiny new policy to replace a job retention scheme, and most people have said that the new scheme is really not going to do what the Chancellor said. So that's not a strategy. That's just that's a one policy. So we need a strategy to get us through the next 6 months. For actual policies, we at Resolution Foundation have also been calling on the government to extend the increased generosity of universal credit for another year. We're still going to have 2, 3, 4 million people unemployed next year, so we shouldn't be taking away the £20 a week that we gave them last April. Some sort of new furlough scheme would be a good idea if the public health restrictions, if the virus continues to spread and we have to shut down more of our economy, because we're going to need to, if that happens, we're going to need to furlough people. Well, we're going to need to furlough people again, and the furlough scheme is going to stop entirely. I think those would be my two. But yeah, a strategy would be good, and not just slogans that we should all be brave, but actual what's the economic strategy? What's the strategy to ensure that our economy is going to be functioning as well as possible in 6 or 12 months' time, and employing as many people as possible in 6 or 12 months' time? I guess my concern.
Absolutely, I agree with that. One thing I'd add is and it kind of comes back to what was discussed at the start, is a strategy around the public health response and the regulations as well. And I do think, obviously, a lot of that's been made up on the hoof up to this point, and I think that's kind of understandable because we didn't really understand the nature of the virus and how it spreads and what the risks are and what the costs are of certain regulations versus other regulations. And I think there needs to be a proper kind of thorough cost benefit analysis, and then a clear indication of this is what's going to happen, and these are the industries that are going to be damaged as and when we have more regulations. Because I think at the moment it's just they're coming up, like the curfew, for example, as was mentioned, doesn't seem necessarily the best policy. The eat out to help out seems a bit mad to do in the middle of a pandemic, in my opinion. There's lots of things that seem to be a bit on the hoof, and I think now is the time to just get all that in order and decide where the kind of regulations are going to come in, and that's based on the that will obviously have to be based on the science, but I think we know enough about it. We have a sense of the way that it spreads in terms of these kind of super spreader type events or locations. So I think we've got a lot more information than we had at the start, and we can design the regulations a bit more sensibly than has currently been designed. I'm not the person to do that because I don't have a background in medicine, but I do think that needs to be done, but it needs to be done in reference also to the cost, obviously to the cost to the economy as well, because there's, that's has an impact on people's health as well. So yeah, it needs, I think that real joined up thinking hasn't been done, and now is the time to do it for sure.
Well, while they're doing their joined up thinking, Mike, it would be very remiss of me to have a chief economist from the Resolution Foundation here and not say, what does the recovery look like? What happened to that V shape that the Bank of England thought we were going to have?
Still does.
We've had W shapes, we've had K shapes. What is it going to look like if you were going to forecast it, given what we know 6 months in?
Andy Haldane at the Bank of England is still very bullish.
Yeah.
I mean, forecasting is a mugscape, isn't it? I think we saw a rapid rebound because we just shut down so heavily. So having shut down so heavily, we opened up and we naturally sprung back. But I guess what we're seeing now is we sprung back maybe half the way. What's the reason it's so hard to forecast is, so we've already said this, Philip was saying this, that the state of the economy depends upon the state of the restrictions imposed on us because of the virus. So it's the public health restrictions that are getting, they are the biggest determinant. They were the biggest determinant, sorry. I guess as we move into the next 6 months, 12 months, what's also going to be important is people's confidence. And I guess that's true for all recessions, isn't it? And that was the great thing about the initial measures the government took, throwing money at very generous in all its schemes. And that would have helped prevent confidence from collapsing in March when we shut down the economy. I think we need, perhaps because we haven't got a strategy, perhaps because people see the limitations of what the government's doing, that confidence is starting to wane. And with looming unemployment, that's never going to give businesses the confidence to invest or individuals the confidence to spend. So we're getting into that part of the recession where, and Andy Halliday was touching on this. I mean, he was a bit too gung-ho about it, but he's right that a lack of confidence leads to a worse recession. So it's government, but it's government's job to give people
self-fulfilling.
Yeah, it's self-fulfilling. So it is part of government's job to give people that confidence, but it doesn't do it just by telling us to be confident. They do it through by announcing policies which give us reassurance, which give us the confidence. And I think many people quite rightly do not feel that right now, with the furlough scheme ending, with many people going to be unemployed and on benefits which don't pay very much, and with businesses worrying about how they are going to pay back all the loans that they've taken on in the last few months. So we're going to move into the recession, which is harder because it's all starting to interlock with each other, to play with each other, and confidence is going to be very important.
Stephanie, how confident are you?
I am very confident that travel is going to come back, and when it does come back, it's going to go bonkers because people are desperate to go on holiday. They're absolutely desperate. I know you're not.
No, I'm not much of a holiday maker, but if you find me somewhere that I can go and really get to know people and get to know the place, then I'm very happy to.
I will sort you a holiday out.
Yeah, in the Arctic.
Breon, you run your own company. How confident are you?
I'm beginning to see things. Yeah, I'm beginning to see some green shoots, and things are looking exciting on the horizon. But as you say, as Mike was saying, it could all very much go downhill if the new restrictions are brought in, if further things are being, if the confidence isn't there, if business confidence isn't there, because ultimately I'm selling B2B, I'm selling into businesses, services. So it's just very much, and to be quite honest with you, some of the businesses that I've been speaking to recently, they're trying to sort of almost justify buying additional services when they're making staff redundant at the end of the day. And how can they justify that? It's not something. So if things are moving in that way, it's not going to be a good climate, put it that way.
Philip, how confident are you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of echo that. That's a sense, I have a similar sense from our business that then people don't want to spend additional money at this point because of that exact reason. How can they justify laying off members of staff that they have for the people that are left over, and then investing in new things like, in our case, obviously reports and things like that. So I think from a business owner, I kind of see it from that side. Also, but there are, as you say, green shoots, and from what we've seen, we've kind of pivoted a little bit. And I think we're a bit stronger and leaner and better at what we do from that time. So for the businesses that survive, they'll be stronger for it. And there's evidence of exactly that. Businesses that do well now, 10 years later, they're the ones that are still doing well. So I think that's the lesson. But yeah, obviously not everyone's in the same position. And I think that's very unfortunate. But yeah.
Well, I'm confident that Mickey will still be grumpy next week, but Mickey, you and I'll be back to talk about more topical business issues. And in fact, next week we're going to have a look back to see what did happen at that Tory party virtual conference and what they did talk about and what plans did come out of that. So join us again.
Some benefits to the lockdown, not had to listen to the politicians at their conferences.
Well, there you go. It's an ill wind, as they say, that blows nobody any good. In the meantime, Stephanie Jepson, thank you very much for joining us. Mike Brewer, Philip.
Cheers, Steph.
Thank you
very much indeed. Breon, we will talk to you
well done, Mike.
soon. And in the meantime, if you want to contribute any comments on anything you've heard or anything that's happening in your business, then please do email us, contact us at backinbusiness.org.uk, find us on LinkedIn, or we're on Twitter at business_backin, and see you next week.